Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining in. My name's Harry Colbert Jr. I'm the managing editor at MinPost, and we are going to be talking about the Timberwolves and their upcoming playoff series with the Los Angeles Lakers with our award-winning writer, Britt Robson. As Britt was saying before, if you could please mute your microphones unless you are speaking. We also have an icon where you can raise your hand virtually, and we will call on the hands that we see raised in the order in which we receive them. If you would like, you can also chat a question to us on the side chat panel. Normally, we have a closed captioner who joins us. If let's see, I think I can mute these myself. Apologies. Normally we have a closed captioner who joins us, but unfortunately we were not able to have our closed captioner today. But with that being said, it is April the 16th, and we chose this date for our Zoom because at the time of us putting this program together, we had no clue where the Timberwolves would land because everything was that fluid. They could have been everywhere from 8 to, I believe, 4. And so we chose this time to have this conversation. As it turns out, the Timberwolves got the number 6 spot, and they will match up against the Los Angeles Lakers with a revamped unit over there. And that being said, at this point, I will turn it over to Britt.
Thanks, Harry. First of all, thanks everybody who comes. I'll repeat again, if you have a question, don't be shy. No such thing as a stupid question. The only stupid questions are the ones you leave in your head. So I guess I'll just preface everything by saying that the Lakers obviously have a mystique. They have Luka Doncic and LeBron James, one of the top 5 players in the NBA currently, and one of the top 2 players in NBA history. That's a lot of talent. That's a phenomenal amount of court IQ. And if you've looked around, you know that the Wolves are decided underdogs in this, in part because of that mystique, in part because the playoffs are known as a time for the brightest stars to shine, and those are 2 very bright stars. And then the narrative of, the Luka's never won one. LeBron is on his final years. We've been saying that for about 4 or 5 years, but it still pertains. And so the Wolves are kind of like supposed to be a foil, I think, for this particular series. But, I've spent the last 2 days in media stuff with the Wolves. We've interviewed a lot of the players at length, and Coach Chris Finch both days. And I've been impressed with the way they are regarding this, their mental attitude about this. They went to the finals last year. This is their 4th straight trip out of the play-in into the playoffs. Their 3rd straight trip, I believe, skipping the play-in. So it's a veteran team when it comes to the postseason. And I'm going to write a column tomorrow, and while I may have toyed with the idea, I still think it's very, very hard to pick against the Lakers, but I would not prefer to go that direction, not because I'm a homer, but because I really think the more interesting story is some viable ways I see that this team could surprise and could beat them. So it'll be along the theme of X amount of ways the Timberwolves could spring the upset. But with all that said, why don't we get into specifics if anybody has any questions? If not, Harry usually rolls one out.
We've got a couple of hands raised, but
great.
Since you brought it up and you said specifics about how the team could surprise the Lakers, do you mind teasing a little bit of that?
No, not at all. One of the first ones would be greater balance. The Timberwolves have become a very good offensive team in the last 6 to 8 weeks, and they actually have a Now the caliber of opponent, the schedule was, they had the 30th easiest schedule in the NBA after the All-Star break, but they have been extremely good on offense. They've actually been in many ways better on offense than on defense. They've been 18-8 since the All-Star break. They have the third best offensive rating, meaning points scored per possession, in those 26 games. They're 12th on defense. In the last 15 games, they're 11-4, fifth best offense in the NBA, 11th best defense. Last 10, 8-2, eighth best offense, sixth best defense. When you're in the top 8 at both sides of the ball, even with the caliber of opponent being lesser, and I do want to emphasize that is a significant contextual factor. It still matters, and the way that this team has begun to play better offense, I think, is an important part of this, especially since the offense has not come at a significant diminishment of the defense. So that's one thing. I think they're a lot better balanced than they've been in previous seasons. Last year, they went to the Western Conference Finals with the 17th ranked offense in the NBA. Of course, they had a phenomenally great defensive team, and they were first in defense. But I do think the upgrade in the offense is something that casuals will think is simply because of Anthony Edwards, and that's not necessarily the case. So let's take some questions.
Jerry.
Put on your mic, Jerry. I still can't hear you.
Jerry, you're on mute. Jerry, you're on mute.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Just a couple of quick comments. I feel like I'm optimistic about what's going to be happening. Second is I really appreciate hearing you and Dane talk about the Timberwolves. I listen to every time you do that. My question is, say at the end of the first quarter, the score is tied 30-30. What did you feel better about, if Ant has scored 4 points or if he scored 14? And I don't know the answer to that, because I would feel good about him being on heater and maybe scoring 50, or the fact that he's working with the team. So how would you feel better? And my real question is, what do you want for Ant in the first quarter of a game?
What I want Ant to do is take what the defense gives him. But having said that, will say that I think the defense will start out giving Ant the ability to enable his teammates. I think that Ant, almost as much as any player in the NBA this season, has seen double coverage, has seen gap help off that double coverage. And for a long time, one of the reasons he saw so much of it is because it's been successful. Anybody who watches the Wolves for any length of period of time knows that one of the ways the offense bogs down is when Ant gets stubborn and ball sticky about what he is able to do, and begins to force the issue. The same with the secondary primary scorer, Julius Randle. One of the things that they've been able to do more effectively in the last 3 or 4 weeks is be multifaceted on offense. And that means Ant recognizing coverages, Julius Randle recognizing coverages, and also feeding Rudy Gobert more specifically, which involves Mike Conley more. And all of that has a cascading effect. So the answer to your question is 4 points, in which case there'll probably be 3 assists, and a 30-30 game means they're getting 30 points. And so I think things are working out pretty well, especially on the road. Next.
Greg.
Hey, Greg.
Hey, so my question is about Finch. I think he took a lot more heat this year than he ever has. I personally like him as a coach. I've been a coach myself, and I like how he interacts with his players, and he's not a screamer, and he's just seems to be an intellectual coach, which I enjoy. But he's very stubborn, and he wouldn't switch lineups, wouldn't play the young guys. Took a lot of heat for that. I guess I have 2-part question. What do you think he did well this year, and then what do we need from Finch in the playoffs to make another run?
I think what Chris Finch has always done well is player relations. I think that he's never really had an unhappy locker room. I mean, even when Rudy Gobert infamously punched Kyle Anderson and was suspended for a game at a very inopportune time before the Wolves were entering into a play-in game. The locker room was not fractured by that. It was a heated moment that spilled over. They made peace with it within 48 hours, if not less, and the locker room stayed intact. I think the biggest locker room problem, if there was such a thing, in Finch's tenure was D'Angelo Russell kind of being impatient with the way Gobert played and vice versa. Russell having, I think, in my opinion, an inflated opinion of his role and what he could do and could not do. Finch devised a defense that covered D'Lo's weaknesses. D'Lo was very good at recognizing things, not very good at moving his feet and grinding in. And basically the high wall concept that he used enabled D'Lo to be a communicator as much as a defender and call out coverages he saw. And so that was an example. Now, the other thing is they kind of coached up D'Lo. They tried to trade D'Lo in the summer before they did trade him, and there wasn't much to be had for him. And Finch coached him up, and D'Lo, to his credit, played well enough that they were able to make, in my opinion, the greatest trade in Wolves history, getting Mike Conley, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and a second-round pick. So, and if I'm not mistaken, that second-round pick may be Utah's, which means it may be like the 31st or 32nd pick in the draft this year, which is pretty damn good. Some would argue that a very early second-round pick is better than a late first-round pick because of the salary. There's no salary constraints. There's not a salary slot, and you can negotiate maybe even a middle-term, long-term deal on the cheap. But back to Finch, he communicates well with his players. He gives them a lot of rope that can be really frustrating. And I think that trust and that laissez-faire attitude is often the case. Your vices and your virtues are pretty close together. He's not a taskmaster. And as a result, some of the chronic failings of this team have been chronic and chronic again. His failure to call timeouts was aggravating, and he's gotten better at that, meaning that he's kind of ceded a little bit of the wisdom of doing that more often. I think that he has the trust of Anthony Edwards, which is enormously important in the NBA. If Anthony Edwards said 10 minutes from now he wasn't happy, or if he said it a month from now, or if he said it a month ago, it would be front page news. And there would be social media eruptions about where Anthony Edwards should be traded. I mean, De'Aaron Fox is no Anthony Edwards, and he consumed the news cycle because he suddenly wasn't happy in Sacramento. It's very, very important for a coach to have not only the faith of his best player, but also the commitment of his best player to, when Ant called out the team just before Thanksgiving and blamed the team, one of the things he said, well, what should they be doing? He said, we should be listening more to our coach. On the other hand, Ant has gone rogue on a variety of occasions this year and has not run the play that Finch called, deciding that he could do something different and better. And then there are other times on the other side of the ball where Ant, has not been as strong off ball and has not been as engaged. So, and Finch, again, give and take, Finch allows that to happen. I think the record speaks for itself. The Wolves are in the playoffs for the fourth straight season. This is the fourth straight season that Chris Finch has had a full season with the team. His winning percentage is, I believe, the best on the Wolves history by now. I think he's over Flip, who was responsible for all the other playoff appearances, but one that Tibbs went with Jimmy Butler as an 8 seed. In terms of what Finch does wrong, in addition to kind of what I was saying before, I do think that he is very, very tight with his rotation. I think he didn't have to be as tight as he was this year. I think that the 8-man rotation it's a great 8. I think that when the injuries happened, I think we saw some of the things that were nice to learn. We learned that Jalen Clark is an extremely good on-ball defender, but even more surprising, somebody who does not hurt you on offense. That would have been nice to know earlier. That TJ Shannon is somebody who's plug-and-play guy in terms of he could be an 8th or 9th man if the Wolves had a little bit less talent at the end of their bench. And then just in general, I think the idea of Finch does have some set in his ways, things of doing things, and the players know it. And there's always a danger in the NBA of people getting too used to each other, a coach and the roster getting too used to each other. And the time before anybody really realizes it running itself out. All that said, and I know it's a winding answer, but I'll finish by saying that I'm a coach-centric person when I watch basketball. I did not agree with Memphis's coach being fired. I did not agree with Denver's coach being fired. I thought it was both ridiculous, not only for the timing, which was the most ridiculous thing about it, but also because I did not think that what they would have in store was sufficient. They did not have somebody in place that was going to improve the team. And so I thought in both those instances, it hurt the team. And so that's my bias.
All
Who's up
right.
next?
Thank you so much. Lucas.
Hi, Britt. Thank you for doing this.
Sure.
My question is about exploiting Luka Doncic as a defender. I remember after the finals last year seeing like a graphic on ESPN that showed like record number of blow-bys by a defender in playoff history. And Luka was like in the top 3 of the top 5, the Celtics series, the Thunder series, the Clippers series. Nowhere to be found on the list was the Wolves series. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that opportunity, something that we did not do against the Mavs that we could do against the Lakers. One other thing I'll say, I realize that there's kind of a trade-off or risk there in terms of Ant playing hero ball or too much ISO on offense. But I guess is that something you think the Wolves will do? And is it something they should do?
I think that making Luka Doncic work, however that happens, is a good idea. I think that when you have a 41 or 42, I can't remember exactly how old LeBron is, but a superhuman by normal human standards, endurance guy, but still somebody in his early 40s, and somebody who has always played heavier than his ideal playing weight, is a recipe for pushing and taxing those people. It's especially true since both of them have become much more adept on the offensive side of the ball than the defensive side of the ball. That Luka was always that way. LeBron has slowly but surely become that way. How that's done is a little bit different. I do think that the blow-by aspect, the Celtics, I'm not sure did that much blowing by simply because they're a 5-out team and they are a team that shoots a lot of threes. So maybe they drove and kicked. Maybe they drove by Luka and kicked to the corners. But in my opinion, the way the Wolves should play offense attacking the Lakers is with ball movement and with movement without the ball and making quick decisions, which are the 3 tenets of Finch's flow offense. And when they do that, they're successful. I think measuring up Luka as an isolated defender and blowing past him is not something that the Lakers are going to be surprised that a team will try to do. And I think that they do have some very good help defenders. I think the way to wear out the Lakers defense is by having two guys who create gravity when they have the ball, and that's Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle, and then having them pass when the gravity is becomes such that they are getting two on the ball. The example I will use that I think is the easiest example to use of how the Wolves can be effective on offense is to have Ant bring down the ball and, as happens with many, many teams this year, getting a double team fairly close to being over the half court line, out past the 3-point line, and having another person and maybe two waiting in gap help. And all he has to do is throw a perimeter pass to Mike Conley, and suddenly you have a 40% shooter working with a pick and roll partner that he's been very successful with for many years, and one of the best pick and roll rollers in the NBA. And suddenly the two or three people who are studying Anthony Edwards are going to have to scramble to handle the Conley Gobert pick and roll. And if they do, then they're in scramble mode. Conley can move the ball. He can get it to Randall. He can get it to Jaden McDaniels, whoever is in the game. I think that is the way to wear out Luka Doncic. I think Luka will get blown by because he knows if he gets blown by, obviously, that there's going to be somebody there in the game plan to pick him up. Whereas if everybody's in scramble mode, Luka has no choice but to join the scramble. So that would be the way I attack that. I think that during the rare times, or maybe they aren't so rare, that the Wolves bench unit is on, the bench trio anyway, is on with Luka. I think that the pace of the game will be something. One of the things I'm really excited to see, and I think it's a risk, but I do like the idea of DiVincenzo, Nas, and Na being out there playing a much faster pace and changing the game. Dante DiVincenzo is a catalyst when he is on. If we get the Nas Reed we saw in January, and we get the DiVincenzo who will pull up from 30 feet and disrupt on defense and push and drive and kick, and we have that as a counterpoint to our half-court disciplined swing offense, I think the combination of those two and the fact that Ant once, I mean, way back in the days when he was playing with Jalen Noel, Nas, and Jordan McLaughlin, Ant thrived in that kind of environment. And I can see him getting that in that kind of environment. And so I see a way of taking advantage of the Lakers' defense. And they have some good defenders, but they're not their two main guys. I think Jared Vanderbilt is a very good defender. Jackson Hayes is undersized, but a decent defender. And Dorian Finney-Smith is an excellent defender who's played 4 or 5 years with Doncic in Dallas and is a very key part of this series. But I do think the Wolves have the offensive firepower to make this a surprisingly competitive series in that particular end of the court. I think a lot of people are thinking the Wolves defense has to be really strong and Anthony Edwards has to be Superman. And I think what has to happen is Anthony Edwards has to be a really team player who trusts he'll get the ball back enough. And then if he really needs to save the bacon of this team by going into hero mode, that he could do that, but that should not be anywhere near close to the first option. I think if we have Nas and Dante upping the pace against a relatively thinner bench, it's not a terrible bench, but the Wolves have a better, deeper eight-man rotation than LA does. That mixture will be very good, and that will therefore put less pressure on a Wolves facing a team that has two of the greatest high IQ players in the game who could figure out almost any defense, and that's Luka and LeBron.
When the Wolves got the 6th spot and they matched up against the 3 Lakers, you got to beat whoever's in front of you. With that being said, this 3 is not a 3, if you ask me, especially with the addition of Luka.
Well, I think that is certainly, I think when it comes to the postseason and recognizing what's at stake, you're absolutely right. There are teams, the Houston Rockets are legit. They are a legitimately really good team. They deserve the 2 seed. And I honestly don't know if the Lakers advance and the Rockets advance in that 2-3 second round, which of those teams I'd pick. And I think the Oklahoma City Thunder are the best team in the Western Conference. But to your point, I think any team in the postseason that has Luka Doncic and LeBron James, with their playoff experience and their ability of knowing how to win and what is needed in the big moments, is a tremendous advantage. And that is a mystique that the Timberwolves will have to confront. But one of the ways I think they can confront it is by upending conventional wisdom that they're going to have to win with defense or they're going to have to win with hero ball from Ant. Because I don't think either one of those things is necessarily true. Yes, they will have to play very good defense. And yes, there are going to be times when Ant will have to make an 11-point deficit, a 4-point deficit with a couple of threes and a layup. But I think in general, if the Wolves are going to win this series, they're going to win this series by taking a lot of casual observers who haven't seen this team a lot by surprise with their offensive versatility and their defense that will be good enough and hopefully smart enough to limit what you get out of Luka and LeBron.
All right, we've got Nathaniel, then we've got Mary and Richard.
Hey there, Britt. Thanks for taking our questions.
Hey, my pleasure.
One thing, if you can help me understand the sort of more national media narrative around Rudy Gobert getting played off the court, a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year getting played off the court. What I guess I don't really understand that where that narrative comes from, and can you also just give your opinion on whether you think that could be true or not, and what would lead to that?
Well, I think let's give the benefit of the doubt to the argument. First of all, it's much more of a space and pace game, and skilled bigs are very, very much a part of that. Having Rudy being compelled to guard somebody who is much quicker and has great range from the outside takes away a lot of the things that make him great. Gobert is an excellent communicator. He is a person who makes tremendous decisions on defense. He's a phenomenal rim protector, and he is very, very reliable. But the reliability of his skill set means that he has reliable weaknesses. And even though those weaknesses have been shored up, I do think that you see that there are certain centers who have a great floater who play the game not at the rim, but play it from 3 to 6 feet out. I'm thinking of guys like Nick Claxton of the Nets or Sengun of the Rockets, who give Rudy fits because they have that little floater. You also have players who are normal stretch fives, and you also have Luka. I mean, let's get to the meat of the matter here, why that national narrative is taking place right now. Luka torched the Timberwolves in the finals last year as a member of the Mavericks, and what they did was totally dominate the Timberwolves defense. Now, Rudy Gobert is the talisman and the leader of that defense, so it was easy to blame Gobert for a lot of what happened. But what really happened was that Luka, there was not a great matchup for Luka. Jay McDaniels was on him for a while. That I contend that remains the best matchup, and I would limit Luka. I would limit the ways we guard Luka, and I would treat Luka the way they try to treat Jokic, which is let him score and shut off his water and other aspects of his game. Much easier said than done, but that would be the way I did that. What Luka was able to do with the Mavericks, though, is he had arguably, I think, was the best dunk threat in the NBA last year, and Lively as a rookie. Derek Lively, too, was just a phenomenal dunk threat. His timing and his leaping ability He was a perfect complement. Then you had guys like P.J. Washington and Jones Jr. From the corners who also knew how to cut, but could also be hitting the cutter at the same time. Then you had a secondary ball handler in Kyrie Irving, who was himself a phenomenal scorer and therefore needed at least one person from the perimeter to guard him. So what happens is Lucas gets into that area of the paint where Gobert has to make decisions. Gobert is primarily a rim protector. And this is where Gobert is, I think, admirable in his courage to look bad. Gobert will contest shots. Gobert will commit one way or the other. Cat, all the time, be caught in no man's land where he was not blocking the shot and he was not getting in front of the defender. No, shame on Cat, who has like size 24 feet and is not the quickest person in the world. But he did not have the instincts Gobert has, and he did not have the decision making to say, all right, I'm going to choose this. As a result, he couldn't be effective either way a lot of the times. Gobert can be effective occasionally. He deters a lot of shots that people don't take, the never mind that Jim Pete talks about, Michael Grady talk about, that deters that. But there are times when he looks bad. There are times when he doesn't come out enough on those guys that can hit those little floaters. There are times when he gets backdoored. And what happened with the Mavs is Luka, the Mavericks, first of all, were playing at peak efficiency. Team had just come together at the trading deadline 2 months before. Everybody was in a groove. He had the choice whenever he wanted, when he was coming in on Gobert, of going all the way to the rim at 6'7", 240 and challenging Gobert at the rim, throwing a lob to Lively, who was one of the great lob threats in the NBA, or dishing it to the corner where either one of those corner guys could either hit a three-pointer or drive the lane. Sometimes if it was a cut, he would hit the cutter for that, a dunk there. In the meantime, the Wolves decided that the best way to play defense was to go high wall because drop back Rudy was getting killed by Doncic. Well, unfortunately, the Mavericks kept maneuvering it so that the low man in the high wall was Mike Conley. And if you remember that Dallas series, there were many, many times where Conley was tasked with handling a big along the baseline into the paint. And that is another reason why the Wolves defense got shredded by the Mavericks in that series. So what does all that mean? All that means is the Wolves looked terrible on defense. Luka Doncic carved them up. The iconic plays are the 2 30-pointers that Luka hit, one to win the game, 2 or 3 others in game 5 that set the tone for the closeout. And some of them were because Gobert was up. But I got to tell you, if you're shooting a 30-footer, it doesn't matter whether Rudy Gobert is 5 feet in front of you, or Jaden McDaniels is 5 feet in front of you, or Anthony Edwards is 5 feet in front of you. That's why you shoot a 30-footer instead of a 25-footer. And Luka was hitting those. The fact that it was on Gobert gave a lot of people who don't like Rudy Gobert, for a variety of reasons. He's French. He's very, very much of a stepfather kind of guy. He's a scold in terms of how he wants people to do things, and he's constantly communicating that. He sometimes looks stiff. His mistakes are loud. His attributes are quiet. And it's easy to rip on him. Ironically, one of his biggest critics, Draymond Green, plays defense very, very similar. He's a communicator. He's all about positioning, and he's all about keeping people in line and being accountable. So all this is going to fuel Gobert. I have no idea how it work out, because I know that Gobert plays the game the way he's always played the game, which is he'll choose to commit. And if the commitment is not the right commitment, he'll be postered, or he'll be letting a man come right from behind him and score. But understand that one of the things that happened when Gobert came over from Utah to the Timberwolves is the Timberwolves had to work extremely hard to convince him to expand his territory and not be simply a low block guy, and be up on people. And the team that in the regular season that he was up on the most was the Dallas Mavericks with Luka Doncic. And before that playoff series, before they got the likes, before Lively the rookie came to the fore, and before they got Gafford or PJ Washington, that was a very successful strategy, which is one of the things that I think led the Wolves into a false sense of security that they could defend the same way. So what does all that mean? It means that Gobert is not played off the floor. He was played off the floor more often in Utah, only because in that Clippers series, he continued to play drop coverage, and guys like Trey Mann and some of the other wings that he was stuck on so he could lurk around the basket, shot at will. And Utah's collection of defenders were nowhere near the caliber of the Timberwolves collection of the defenders. And the narrative started there that Rudy Gobert was not meant for the modern game, pace and space modern game. And then Rudy Gobert led the #1 defense in the NBA by a very wide margin last year, and deserved his player of the year. And yes, looked bad on occasion in the playoffs. He'll always be a polarizing figure. I'm not the only person to say this. This is common consensus by now, that if you watch Gobert every day, your appreciation of him is much, much greater than if you watch him only when he comes through town. That certainly was the case with me when he was in Utah. I had no idea why Gobert rose and fell during the course of a game as much as he did. And the more you see how much he gives to the team and how much he wants to trust his teammates, and then does trust his teammates, and then gets burned by trusting his teammates and tries to adjust. It's a fascinating thing. So there are some weaknesses in Rudy Gobert's defense, and there are some weaknesses in his offense, which plays into it as well. Although he's done a great job in the last 6 weeks of rebutting that too. He does have stone hands on occasion. His hand-eye coordination is not great. And he certainly, if he gets the ball 8 feet from the basket, everybody holds their breath, because we never know what kind of weird mechanism will happen. On the other hand, since he's come to the Timberwolves, he has been a legitimizing force in making this team a playoff perennial and a potential championship contender.
All right. Thank you, Mary.
I've noticed, Britt, that you've often been in the locker room afterwards or at the press conferences, and I'm wondering how it is that you decide who you interview, or are they just hanging around waiting to interview, or do you choose who you want to interview?
Because Jace Frederick, John Krasinski, and Chris Hine are pretty much beat writers. I've never been a beat writer. They do all the work I hate, which is like the grind, the daily details. Anyway, they have to file stories and they need quotes. Mm-hmm. And so one of the Wolves communication staff people, usually it's Aaron Freeman after games, goes up to John, Chris, and Jace. John usually takes the lead on that, but if John isn't handy at the moment, he'll ask Jace or Chris, who do you want? And then they give him 3 names. And usually you get 2 out of 3, and you might get a third that you weren't expecting. And maybe it's because the player just wants to blow it off. Maybe it's because the player is in treatment that day after the game. Maybe it's because the player has family in town, wants to get out of the locker room. But generally speaking, they'll want the people who are most impactful for the game. The joke is that if it's a bad loss, you go to Mike Conley, because he's the person that will always be a classy and intelligent analyst as to what happened. But they're all, it's a great locker room. I've covered a lot of bad locker rooms, both in and out of Minnesota, and this is a good locker room. Tim Conley makes it a priority to assemble rosters that don't have problems. And Chris Finch's coaching method solidifies that some. So what you get most of the time are honest reflections from people and good stuff.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thank you. So a question that's not so much prospective, a little bit retroactive, and I'll just indicate easy for me to ask since I'm not a very good basketball player and I'm not a kid. So Anthony Edwards strikes me as a very unique and unusual basketball talent. But when I look at the fact that the Timberwolves were 3 games away from, I think 3 games from being the number 2 seed, I'm just curious as to how many games his maturity or lack thereof lost for the Timberwolves this season. And what you earlier question you asked was asked of you about the coach's relationship with players as to what the coach is doing with that. Their comment I'd make is it struck me that his technical on Saturday was inference on my part that it was a referee who was just tired of him because it didn't seem much of a technical. So how is that going to be dealt with against the Lakers?
That is an ongoing question. I think since he got his 16th technical and was suspended for a game, since then he's gotten 1 official technical and 1 that was rescinded that would have cost him the last game of the season against Utah in the season finale, which was determining whether or not the Wolves were going to be in the play-in. It was an important game, and it was a silly technical. Yes, it was rescinded. But the point is that is kind of a moral for the Wolves season in that Ant began to really pay attention to his technicals when it was too late. When he was on 14, 15, 16, and after he got 16 and then the team got burned, then Ant got better at it. Now, he's 24 years old. He is one of the most adroit, instinctual interviews I've ever encountered. He has a habit of being both childish and wise and pithy and yet humorous. There is a natural part of who he is, his personality, that I would be afraid to break if he was reined in. But you have to acknowledge that when you can tell, especially if it's a Saturday afternoon game, Ant will not play as well as he plays on Friday night. He doesn't like to wake up and play basketball at 2:30, I don't think. If it is against the Washington Wizards instead of the Golden State Warriors, he will not be ready to play as with the focus and intensity that he needs to be able to play with. If he is guarding somebody face up, he will be a much better defender than if he's called upon to make sure off the ball that somebody isn't making a back cut behind him or somebody isn't doing a back screen by which somebody's going to shoot a 3-pointer. Long story short, Ant has issues with consistent focus and intensity. What you could say in the rebuttal for Ant, I know the age rebuttal, I've heard it with all the young Timberwolves players who didn't pan out. I heard it with Andrew Wiggins. I heard it with Zach LaVine. I heard it with Pooh Richardson, for God's sake, is that give them time and, things will get better. Well, with Ant, it is different because Ant has shown dramatic improvement in various aspects of his game every season. This year, suddenly a guy who was in the top 5 in terms of the number of buckets at the rim suddenly became the best, most prolific 3-point shooter in the NBA. Boom. His numbers were eerily similar to Steph Curry from outside this year. That just happened. Um, his dunks are the kinds of things that bring people into an arena. Um, his interviews are a source of endless entertainment for people who cover him. His leadership in the locker room is such, his ability to credit his teammates is respected and appreciated by all of those teammates. So what you get is you get a phenomenal player who's great with his team, who has some glaring immaturities that if you deny them, you're just an ostrich about it. And the idea that you have to take the bad with the good, in this particular case, is you're taking somebody who is not fully mature, and you're taking somebody who has some deficiencies that will cost you, as you pointed out. I'd say probably for 4 or 5 games this year. I would also say that if Ant didn't play, they would lose probably 20 fewer. So you have to wait him out in terms of growth. But there is a lot of evidence to indicate that if you do that, the rewards will continue to be more positive than negative with each passing season. Does that mean that when I'm on Twitter or Blue Sky, I don't deliver as many negative tweets about Ant as positive tweets? No. I mean, because you got to call it out. But I laugh at myself. You criticize Ant at your peril, because the moment you say he's not trying on something, or the moment you say he's a ball hog or whatever, he will do something that will be something nobody else can do. And there is a reason why he is beloved by so many veteran NBA players who have talked about the fact that the game is soft now, or the team, the basketball isn't what it used to be. The old timers like Ant because he can play in a manner that is both joyful, is true to the challenge of the game. I mean, Ty Lue was the coach of the World Cup team back. This is before the Olympic team, when Ant was on the World Cup team, and Tyrese Halliburton, a couple of other people were there. And he said there was a kind of a choice as to, it was up in the air how the leadership was going to happen. And he said that Ant became the leader of this team by his defense in practice. He basically shut down anybody he played. And he said, I've never seen better on-ball defense than I've seen from Anthony Edwards. And he coached LeBron James for, like 6 years. And Ant's ceiling is a cathedral ceiling. And it is adorned with marvelous stained glass windows and eaves and things that will cause you to say that's artwork. It needs to be matched by the kind of maintenance that will really make it as glorious as it should be. But we're lucky enough to be in the process of seeing whether or not that can happen.
All right, thank you. We've got Greg and then Jasper.
Okay, thanks for letting me ask a second question. Circling back to Finch, going back to the Memphis playoffs, and I think he stuck with D'Lo too long, and I think in retrospect we all saw that he was costing us games at the end. I think he was afraid to step on toes. Do you see Finch has changed in that way, and do you think in the playoffs it's going to be who's ever playing best? It's going to play at the end or whatever point in the game? Because I've kind of seen that over the last month, but I'm hoping that continues in the playoff. Do you think he'll be flexible in that?
I don't. I think that I think the only possible wedge there, first of all, I'll give you my bias. My bias is that Naz Reid should have been starting over Julius Randle all season. Chris Finch coached Julius Randle in New Orleans. They developed a relationship. Julius Randle was, in my view, a salary evener in that trade. They wanted Dante DiVincenzo as a bridge between Mike Conley and Rob Dillingham. And Dante's getting 12 million a year for 3 seasons is an incredible bargain in the current NBA. But you had to make the salaries match with Cat, and Cat is going to be paid $60 million in 28, 29, and you couldn't have that. So they had to, work against that proactively. You also got the Pistons pick. So between Dante, the salary cap relief, and the Pistons pick, I regarded the acquisition of Julius Randle as the 4th best thing about that trade. But Chris Finch didn't. He regarded it as, I've got another guy who will really work here. And my feeling on this is that if Naz and Gobert have always played really, really well together. If it's Naz instead of Randle in the starting lineup, Mike Conley gets to be the playmaker he always is more often. Jaden McDaniels gets to be less of a catch and shoot guy because he's not getting the ball from Randle with 2 or 3 seconds on the clock. It just would function better. And then he could be in the second unit where Dante is also coming off the bench. They know each other well. They work together well. And his more ball-centric approach would fit better. Finch didn't go that way. And to Finch's credit, I think Randle has grown a tremendous amount this year. He's become a much more valuable player. My opinion on Naz over Randle holds. But I will also, you'd be crazy not to see that Julius Randle has begun to become a lot more valuable to this team than he was before. And you also have to see that defensively, we've discovered that when he's on the floor with Naz, he is much better at defending the opposing center than Naz is. He's bigger, he's tougher, and that is a skill set that came on later. Bottom line, Julius Randle has been flexible in what he's needed, and Finch has been flexible with him. And I think that will continue, even if Julius Randle is terrible. He will continue to start every game. I think that Jalen Clark has a role as somebody who can guard Luka Doncic pretty well, like in probably the top 3 or 4 on the roster, even though he's the 9th man. I think that putting Jalen Clark in the game will mess with playoff minutes for the other 8 people. It's a kind of like a Jenga board in terms of, you can't just say, well, let's just give Jalen Clark 12 minutes. Well, that 12 minutes has to come out of somebody's time. And if you take that other person out and you're substituting Jalen Clark, it really does mean that the pairings and trios that you're using in rotation will have a different colliding effect. And so it's much easier said than done to just say, well, let's play him more. And Finch has the trust and the loyalty of the 8 people that are comprising what I would argue is one of the top 3 or 4, if not 2 or 3, best 8-player rotations in basketball. So I think it's somewhat politics, but it's also the reality in the NBA. When D'Lo was substituted when he went to J-Mac in that game 6 in a losing cause, but it was obviously the right thing to do. It also put distance between him and D'Lo that wasn't going to be easily solved. It's very, very hard to be a coach, and what happens behind the scenes in the NBA is just phenomenal. I know this because a good friend of mine, Sam Mitchell, was the best man at his wedding. And when Sam was coaching the Toronto Raptors, This friend of mine wouldn't talk about what was happening, but when Sam left Toronto, he filled me in on everything that happens behind the scenes. And he says it's not unusual in basketball. What you have to deal with in terms of entourages, agents, the media, friends, and personal crises that go on in people's lives. And there's 10 or 12 and 14, 15 people now contracts. It is a real balancing act to try to keep everybody happy and create the best possible outcome. And sometimes that organic whole is more important than winning a game. Now, does that mean in the playoffs that's true? It is certainly less true. But you better hope you're right if you depart from what everybody assumes is their role. You see, I mean, Steve Kerr stopped playing Jonathan Kuminga. Jonathan Kuminga coming into this year was going to be like one of their top 7 guys. I mean, there's a cost for that. Just like there's a cost, like when Steve Kerr was coaching and he didn't play Tatum, and play, the decisions that are made, some people starting or not starting means a lot. I assume that's true of Julius Randle. Julius Randle also has a player option, $31 million this year. Naz Reid has a $15 million player option. Julius Randle would be hard pressed to get $31 million on the open market, and he'll opt in, I would think. Naz could get more than 15 on the open market, but I'm not sure in this current climate he can get the 25 to 30 he deserves, simply because teams are capped out, and it's very, very hard to the people in between the rookie scale deals and the superstar max players. Those are the players who are getting really squeezed by this. And all this is a legitimate part of the answer of whether or not Chris Finch can suddenly say, I'm playing this hunch. And it may happen on occasion. He may bump a rotation or something. But in terms of a seismic change, I'm not sure that will happen.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. It is Jasper.
Hey, Jasper.
Hey, thanks for doing this.
Sure.
I guess firstly, I just think one big reason to be optimistic is that Ant and Nas and Jaden and maybe Dante too have all kind of been playoff risers. So I think if that happens, things could get really fun. And then my question was about like pick and roll coverages with Hayes versus with Lively, because I know you and Dane have talked about like the short roll with Lively was kind of the big thing.
Yeah.
What does Hayes probably not being as much of a threat in the short roll open up for pick and roll coverages? Does that mean that like a high wall or a blitz might work better? Or
Well, they tried both with Doncic when Doncic was with Dallas, and neither one worked, but then nothing worked. Let's face it. I'm of the belief, first of all, Jackson Hayes is not as good as Lively, but he is probably one of the things he does best on offense, maybe the thing he does, is he cuts well and is a decent lob threat. He's a very athletic guy. He's not very, very powerful, but he's large and gets up. Vando, less so, but still that way. Those are their two bigs, as it is. Blitzing Luka, the thing about it is he's so damn smart, and he's got a teammate who is so damn smart that I'm trying to figure out how to write this tomorrow, but essentially I would treat Luka the way they treat Jokic. Give him 40, 45, try to get the assists into single digits. And importantly for Luka, stop his rebounds and those baseball passes, football passes. Luka Doncic is a transition threat when he grabs a defensive rebound. And Finney Smith knows it. A lot of the people know it. they burned the Wolves with people that way last year. The Lakers this season in their meetings. That is a stopping transition defense. I mean, stopping transition offense, which has never been a good thing for the Wolves. They have trouble matching up on the fly, and they have, quite frankly, have not been dedicated to that as much as they should be. Both Randall and Ant have been guilty of that on occasion. But especially against the Lakers, what you want to do with Luka is you want him to shoot 17 for 31 and only have like 7 assists and 5 turnovers and 8 rebounds. That sounds ridiculous, but that's a pretty good line for the Wolves. That means he's got like 38, 9 and 8 or something. It's better than if he has like 26, 14, and 10. And on the flip side, that the same thing is true. If Ant and Randall are flirting with triple doubles, and Finch said this today in the media, that's when the Wolves have a much better chance of winning, because everybody's touching the ball, and that means that Conley and Gobert and McDaniels and Dante and Nas all get a chance to do things. And this is surprisingly a pretty skillful team on offense. So anyway, that's the way I did directly answer your question, because there is no easy answer. Finch would say he wouldn't cop out. He'd be honest and truthful and accurate by saying you got to throw a lot of different looks at him, which is true. You do have to throw a lot of different looks at him, but my looks would tend toward closing off lanes and incentivizing shots for him. So I know we're running a little late, but I want to say I do this at the end of every one of these Zooms. I don't do Substack, and the only time I've ever written for a paywall publication was with The Athletic for a while. I'm always bothered by the idea of having people having to pay to read me in that way. And so I would say that for people who would say, hey, you know, I love reading that guy, I'll pay $5 a month for his Substack, or 10 or whatever it is, or whatever. Understand that what I like about being at MinnPost is that it is a newspaper that engages the issues. It writes about the legislature, it writes about Congress, it writes about the community issues in our day. It's not afraid of every single one of the words in the D, the E, and the I. And it also is a place that allows me to be the kind of writer I want to be. Allows me to write when I want to write, with some restrictions as long as I want to write, and allows me to set my schedule. And so that's worth a lot to me. It's why I'm here. And that's why when I put my oar in the water to try to help MinnPost, doing these meetings and then saying something afterwards is my way to do it. So no one's ever going to twist your arm. I don't believe in it. You know whether you're willing and able to give, and that's your business. If you don't feel that way or you don't want to, fair enough. I'm not forcing anything. But I will say this is my ask on behalf of MinnPost. If you're so inclined, that's the way I'll close it out.
Well, Britt, we want to say thank you again, and thank you to everyone who tuned in Saturday at 7:30 Central Time. It is Wolves versus Lakers, game 1 of the NBA Western Conference playoffs. And hopefully we can prevail. You've given us a lot of keys to the car here. You certainly mapped out the road for a good Wolves win, and at least an entertaining series. And to follow up on Britt's ask, if you would like to donate, you can go to our website, minnpost.com, and there is a donate button on the homepage and throughout the stories as well. Also, Britt has a newsletter and one. You can subscribe to our and one newsletter and get Brent's take and his inside and one take. Again, thank you so much for being a part of this, and hopefully we will see you in round 2. Have a good
Absolutely.
evening.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody, for chiming in. Appreciate it.